Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and we are back, and I'm joined with Rick once again. And today's episode is going to be all about comparison. So, as a coach and just a person like living in the world, we all are just used to comparing ourselves to others, and this is something that I really have a lot of my conversations with clients about, which is why I wanted us to do a podcast on it, because I think it's so relevant literally at all points. And understandably, we're going to compare ourselves to, our past selves, to our, what we want our future self to be like, or other people. And I don't think that that's necessarily bad. Like, I don't think that we should be like, no, I'm never going to compare myself to anyone ever again. Like, no, I don't think that's really, it's kind of like how we talk about, like, on the anxiety podcast, like, oh, I never want to be anxious again. Like, okay, good fucking luck. Like, I don't even think it's a good idea to not compare yourself, but there, like everything, is a level to where it can be really, really detrimental. And those thoughts of comparison can literally not just ruin your day, but completely alter your mood and completely alter your decisions.
Yeah.
So let's start with kind of just like comparing like yourself. And something that I deal with a lot of clients is comparing themselves to, what they used to be like, right? Mm-hmm. So whether they are somebody who has competed in a, let's say, a physique competition, right? Everybody, once you've gotten to that place, you know what that feels like, and you will always compare yourself to that, even though everybody who's done that knows that it is super unhealthy, super unsustainable. You felt like a bag of dicks 24/7, but you did. Everybody knows that is listening, okay? But you still want to go back. Do you not use that in your practice?
I do, yeah, regularly.
Now you're going to work it into a conversation. I know it. So, people are always comparing to that, right? Or say somebody is just in a completely different space in their life. Like, they have a new job, they're back in school, they just had a kid. They're comparing themselves like, oh, 5 years ago I could do all this stuff and I wasn't tired. And you're like, well, okay, it's really unrealistic. So I guess working around that type of stuff, like, how do people get past it? Because some people literally, I feel like it's just so hard for them to get past and just accept where they're currently at.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about comparing ourselves to other people, what we're talking about is there's a lack of or a need for acceptance. And psychologically, when a person develops, and we're going to put this in real basic terms and just kind of 10,000 foot view this thing. When you're growing up, the acceptance that you seek is from your parents, and that's a normal, natural, healthy process. And when the parents are accepting of us, we develop a healthier sense of ourselves. Well, as a person progresses into teenager or generally becomes early adulthood, what then ends up happening is we're no longer on a day-to-day basis accepting or looking for acceptance from our parents, and now the acceptance comes from our friends. It comes from our peer group. When you go to college, you start innately not necessarily comparing yourself to other people, but you judge yourself based off of, am I doing what the rest of my social group is doing, the rest of my peers? So that process of, yes, I'm going to class, yes, I'm achieving, I'm acquiring these skills and developing as a person, it's natural to see that reflected in your peer group. And so the majority of people are subconsciously unaware of the fact that they're comparing themselves to other people. But what we're really doing is we're looking for that acceptance. The acceptance is coming from our friends as to whether or not we're on the right path and whether or not we feel better or good about ourselves and our career choices. So when we're talking about comparing ourselves to other people, what we're actually talking about is looking and gaining acceptance for ourselves. And so the natural process is our parents provide that acceptance. We then move away from our parents. We search for that acceptance within our peer group as young adults. And then as we progress to become full adults, we learn to provide that acceptance for ourselves. But what's happening is people aren't accepting of themselves because the idea of comparing yourselves to somebody else means you can never quite obtain what they have. And so it's that incompleteness that creates this desire to want to continue down that path, and you'll never achieve it, which creates more feelings of anxiety and depression. and you never feel like you're good enough because you're not the other person. And so in comparing yourself to other people, what you're essentially doing is rejecting yourself as a person. Now, some level of comparison is okay, right? It's about balance, and it's about understanding, like, am I where I'm supposed to be? You're a coach. 2 clients who come to you the exact same day, who start in the same space, all things considered equal, right? Same height, same weight, same age, whatever, and let's assume that their goals are the same. One is going to progress at a different rate than the other, and if you're comparing that, how do you not feel like a failure? When the reality is, what is the end result going to look like? Now, if this person gets there in a year, awesome for them. Does it make it any less valuable when I get there in 4 years? But we still have this innate desire to want to compare ourselves to somebody else rather than appreciating and accepting our own journey and accepting who we are and recognizing those things. So we internalize somebody else's progress as a failure of our own. And so it sets the trap. And this is where Instagram, Facebook, all these other things, that we were just talking about, create an idea of perfection. But that doesn't actually exist. All the people on social media are just as miserable. They're just hiding it. You don't see them. They're not posting. They're pathetic.
Or they are, and then you're like,
well, click, move on. I can't stand that.
That's a whole different thing. Mm-hmm. I understand being vulnerable, but there is a level where you're like, hey, like, you don't need to post every day that you're having a bad day, which I understand where that came from, because people are trying to, like, go back against the, like, everything's perfect kind of narrative, which I appreciate. But then it's also like, again, this is kind of overkill, you know what I mean? Like, I don't need to see this, or like not even see this, like, this isn't necessarily useful. I guess it can be useful to an extent, right? I think, like, an initial, like, it's kind of like, recognizing that you have a problem, right? Like how we were talking about in the last podcast. So if you see somebody, like, your favorite person on Instagram is having a bad day, or they post something that's a little bit more vulnerable or whatever, right? And you're like, oh, all right, like, they have bad days too, like, they feel like this too, or they're this, they're that. Like, that initially, like, I think is really useful. But then if you see that message over and over again, do you feel, like, good about seeing that, or do you just kind of feel more like you're now wallowing in your own problems? Like, that's at least how I feel, you know what I mean? Like, if you're constantly surrounded by those types of messages, it's not really, like, uplifting, or that's not really, like, help, like, pushing forward. Like, I think every once in a while it's good to kind of put it in there, but if that's the only message now that's being put out, like, that's just as bad as the everything's, like, super perfect all the time message, in my opinion. Like, I think that they both can be taken kind of, like, really out of context. It's like,
well, and it's the fishing for compliments. It's the idea that if I'm posting constantly about all the negative and horrible things, what I'm actually looking for is for people to validate me. I'm looking for more attention in really unhealthy ways. Under the disguise of me saying, like, hey, my life is really crappy and I had this really horrible thing happen to me, I want everybody to see how strong I am, because what happens? Everybody then responds. That post gets more likes than the one where you were just like, hey, great day at the beach. You know what I mean? And so now all of a sudden everybody's like, hang in there, you're worthwhile, and all of a sudden the compliments start coming. So these are the secondary gains that we get from this stuff. Like, when we start utilizing our own depression and anxiety or traumas as a way to gain attention, it creates very unhealthy patterns, and it creates a toxic relationship with people. And you see it all the time play out in social media.
And I think what's sad about that is that, like, so say you do post something like that, and then say people do respond that way, because they usually are. That doesn't necessarily change. Again, that doesn't change the situation. You know what I mean? Like, it's more of just kind of like a vent session, right? Or it's more of like a whatever, and like you might be getting these compliments, but are you still feeling like just as empty and just as upset? Like, most likely, you know what I mean? Like, you had that, like, initial, like, you feel good about it, but that's not really changing the situation. And every time I've ever shared something like that, I almost always just, like, I go back and I'm like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that, because those are the types of comments people leave. And it's like, this was not my intention of it, like, I'm just gonna stop, you know what I mean? But then when you don't share anything that's, like, potentially, like, negative, everybody's like, oh, this bitch's life is fucking perfect, or this is that, like, and you're like, so it's so weird, like, all of that's so weird. But I think the idea of, going back to, like I said, comparing yourself to, whether it's, like, past you or somebody else that you see, and this happens a lot, especially obviously with my clients. So somebody will see, there are just certain people who are going to be able to not eat whatever they want, but they're going to be able to eat significantly more, significantly worse than you, train less than you, have way shittier just lifestyle than you, and look 100 times better than you. They just are. And that's really hard for certain people to swallow. And I understand, because it's not fair. Somebody who tries really, really hard, 98% of the time, looks to the person who tries 10% of the time and is like, well, what the fuck, right? And, I always, whenever a client's really struggling with that, I'm like, listen, there's just some people that are meant to be really, really smart. There's some people who are just incredibly intelligent. There's some people who are just incredibly creative. There's some people who just have a fucking banging body without really trying. You know what I mean? Some people are also supermodels. They didn't try to look like, they just did, right? Like, some people are just generally better looking. So it's like, if you're always going to look at that person, especially when it's something that does come to, something that is really hard to change. Now, obviously you can change your body. And that's the really great thing about it. Like, you can put in a lot of work and make a lot of these changes, but you should never be making those changes because you hope to one day look like this other person, or you hope one day that maybe it'll be easier, or you hope one day, no, you have to do that because you want to make those changes. Otherwise, you're always going to have this negative feeling around it. Like, you're never going to be satisfied no matter what you look like. You could eventually look like that person and still have those same exact feelings, because there's always going to be somebody who's better by your standards, or the standards change. Maybe you wanted to look like a certain person at one point, or have a certain body, and then now you're like, I really like this other thing, but now that's even harder to achieve, right? Like, so I think that you have to understand, okay, well, what am I comparing myself to? Why am I comparing myself to this person? Is it a metric that is, is it something that I can work hard at? Like, okay, do I want to be, do I want to get better grades at school? Like, you can put in, effort to do that. Like, you might not be as smart as some of your classmates, like, that's certainly possible, but like, you can do better work. But then I think there's certain things that, like, people who are driven to think this way are like very type A, like very perfectionist, like they want to always, there's always like an end goal, like, right? Or like, there should be like a plan, like I should be able to do this and then this and then, right? But there's certain things that aren't quite like that.
Sure.
Right? And I think that, like, understanding, like, and that's not a negative perception of it, like, that's just like the reality that, like, you have to understand that, like, you are, first of all, never going to be like somebody else. And there's certain things that shouldn't make you, I guess I don't want people to hear this and not try, because obviously that's not the goal either. But it's just about, like, the realistic understanding that it has to be, like, within your, I guess, scope. I don't know.
Yeah. There's a therapist that I know. She's a great therapist. Her name is Annette. She actually has an office here in South Tampa. One of the things that she likes to say, and she tells people all the time, and she's a very well-established therapist, is she tells the story about, I think it was her mother, who told her at a very early age, look, you're never going to be the smartest person in the room, and you're never going to be the prettiest person in the room, but learn to make good with what you have. And so the idea of it is learning to accept what strengths you do possess. And so what we're now talking about is our mindset, and what do we focus on, and what do you pay attention to. And it's not that and what happens is, I think sometimes, especially with women, is they will internalize this process much more. And so what a woman will see is, they'll look at something and they'll say, it's not that you're pretty, it's that I'm ugly. And so there's a difference in that. And the difference is in your mindset. It's in your inability to accept what strengths you have and work on the areas that you want to work. And so the idea of comparison allows us to internalize this process. And women are more prone to mood disorders. Men will take those negative reactions, and many times it'll develop more in terms of antisocial traits. So for example, when boys receive negative messages, they take that, and yes, they do feel shame, but the way they express that shame is by making everyone else around them miserable, right? So I'm hurt, so I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to create these things. Women have a tendency to take that and internalize it and make themselves unhappy. And so I think the idea of it is learning to be honest with yourself at an early age, if it's possible at an early age, and this is where healthy adults come into play. So for those of you who are parents, like, these are the messages that we really want to start instilling in our kids. It's not an unrealistic expectation of saying, hey, you're perfect all the time, 100% of the time, because you're not. What we do want to do is help them get a very realistic, basic understanding of who they are as a person, and understand that, yes, you have some strengths and you have some weaknesses, and some things that are never going to be true. I'll never be 7 foot tall. It's just the reality of life. But in accepting that, there's a freedom and a gift that comes with it, and it allows you to focus on what you do really well. And if you can focus on what you do really well, you'll feel more like a complete person. You'll find more meaning and purpose and value in who you are, and you'll feel less compelled to look at other people, or you'll set other boundaries up that don't victimize yourself by comparing yourself to other people. Because that's essentially what you're doing. You're creating a scenario to victimize yourself. You can't be other people. You could never live their life. And in doing that, you're creating a cycle of self-defeating thoughts and this kind of self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating prophecy that I'll never be good enough. And that's at the root of anxiety.
And you certainly will never feel good enough if you are constantly telling yourself that. If you're constantly looking at other people and like hoping to be them. Now, the one thing that I think has gotten misconstrued, or at least this is my interpretation of it, is that a lot of times this kind of talk with acceptance and, like self-love and kind of all this, then makes people feel like I think that actually does victimize them in a way that makes them feel like they can't or shouldn't try and change things, right?
Sure.
And obviously, again, especially, this is really prolific in my space. Like, this is like the health and fitness world has been like, it's still a small sector, but there is this sector of like, you don't need to change. Like, you don't need to change yourself. Like, you don't need to change your unhealthy habits. Like, you should just love yourself the way that you are. You should develop self-confidence. You shouldn't be so self-conscious about things. And it's like, yes, I do agree with that to some extent. Like, no matter what, you could be 100 pounds overweight or 100 pounds underweight. If, and then you eventually change your body to come to this, whatever this healthy position is. And if you still don't like yourself or take care of yourself, like, it's not going to matter, right? Or like, we'll go back to the other example of, so say like a competitor, right? Like, you can have all these self-esteem issues, you can have all this stuff, and then you can say, you know what, I'm gonna, I'm changing my body once and for all. I'm gonna do this really extreme thing. I'm gonna feel really good about it. I love how I look, whatever it is. But if you have not done that internal work to actually have confidence, doesn't matter if now you have abs and no body fat. Doesn't matter. You're still that same broken person. So that is incredibly important to work on, self-love and this acceptance and whatever. But I don't think that accepting should be synonymous with not making changes. And I think that is where, like, I don't know what has happened with a group of scientists or a group of academics or culture, whatever the fuck it is, like, this whole message now is being just like really, really pushed, and it makes me worried that it's going to have people think, oh, well, I'm just, what's the point of even trying, you know what I mean? If, because that's the other part of comparison that is really negative. Like, right, like, you can either look at yourself, you can compare yourself to somebody and go, wow, like, I really want to look like that. And then that becomes this unhealthy obsession with like trying to be like somebody else. But it can also lead you to go, I'm going to put my hands up and there's nothing I can do. I'm never going to look like that. So I'm not going to try at all. So I'm not going to make any changes. You're like,
sure.
Whoa, no, that's not a good response either. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to do that, but you can certainly do something. So like, I don't know what's going on with all that, but like the line of like acceptance versus not making any changes and not taking responsibility and becoming this almost like victim of yourself. Like, every time I read that kind of stuff and like those kind of words and that kind of talk, like, all I hear is like, wow, this person they're their own victim of like their own circumstances at this point.
Yeah, it's a form of denial. It's a defense mechanism that people can use to escape and hide from the painful realities that the change that they're asking for is going to take time and effort, and it may not yield the exact results that they want. So you can hide behind that all you want. People will tell you, the idea of the acceptance movement is great in terms of if it's talking about providing unconditional self-acceptance. Well, what do I mean by that? What do I mean is human beings are flawed in their nature. The idea isn't to just accept all of our flaws and not do anything to improve our lives, to not read, to not better ourselves. The idea is, look, I'm a human being and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'll work to understand those mistakes and move forward in my life. And that's essentially what's at the heart of it. So if you want to just say, well, I'm fat and I'm just going to accept the fact that I'm overweight and I'm beautiful no matter what shape or size I am, okay, then why are you here? Why are we talking? If you're sitting in my office, something brought you here, so what is it? And the idea of it is it's not just to hide behind it as a defense mechanism to protect your ego so that it inhibits you from taking the steps to move forward because you're afraid, because you're anxious, right? And it's just kind of, if we can peel back that layer of bullshit that exists with that person and say like, all right, let's really kind of talk about this, because if that were the case, no one would read. No one would push themselves to create new things and do stuff. So the idea that you can't improve is bullshit, and it's a way to hide if you're using it as an excuse. Do I think people should love themselves? Absolutely. Do I want you to accept who you are? Yes. Are there certain things that are within your control to change? Yeah. Your diet is one of them. The way you work out is another one. How you think is another one. You can change how you feel by addressing what your thinking patterns are and your ways of interacting in those relationships and those experiences. All of that is within your control. If you don't want to accept the responsibility that comes with that, then don't. And prepare to be miserable and deal with the consequences. If you're obese, deal with the high blood pressure and the cholesterol and the inability, the low energy and everything else that comes with it. So accept it, and accept the failures that come with it and the limitations, or accept the fact that maybe you're using this as a way to avoid confronting yourself and confronting the changes that are required to be made in your life in order to feel better or do different things.
Do you like see that more? Am I like only noticing this because of like what I do, or like is this just kind of like a more pervasive thing? Because I feel like this has become like very...
I haven't seen it as much in my practice, but I can absolutely see it, and I've shown you, we've talked about this, like there was that one commercial for the ice cream that I couldn't stand. I'm not going to get into it. Or whatever the food product was.
Yeah. There's just the cultural messaging.
For you, I think that's more of a relevant message, because people are coming to me in pain and they're like at least willing to admit that. Yeah, or they're at a different place maybe.
But yeah, obviously my clients aren't saying this, right? Like they wouldn't be coming to me as a client if this is where they're at. But I've just seen this in the kind of space and in the culture and in the push, and again it's I understand like you can't unrealistically compare yourself to somebody, and this is what's so hard. So if you guys listened to 2 podcasts ago with Dr. Lyon, we were talking all about like protein and muscle mass and like the health benefits of that, right? And anytime you tell somebody you should eat more protein or like you should have more muscle mass, they're like, I'm not trying to be a bodybuilder, like relax. Somebody I know in this room says the same thing. You've gotten much better, but right, like you hear that and you go, well, why would I do that? Like, why would I drink a protein shake? Like, why would I work out? Like, that's not necessarily something that I want to do in my life. Like, I don't want to look like Ronnie Coleman, or like I don't want to do, right? And it's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. Like, that is somebody who's dedicated 10, 15, 20 years of their life to one specific goal and structured their entire life around being the most muscular person possible. It wasn't an accident. It was a lot of work. If you go to the gym 3 times a week, maybe 4, and you eat some protein, you're not going to look like that, right? So understandably, most people listening here understand that. But that notion is just so pervasive still in our culture, right? Just with food and the medical community and everything, right? Like just so much bad information. And it's like, no, like you need a baseline level of muscle to be a healthy, functioning person. It's not just body fat, it also is how much muscle that you have. So same thing here. There was so much backlash to the, over dieted, over photoshopped, over perfect, beach body, like fake tits, abs, all the, plastic surgery, whatever, right? Like, understandably so. Like, that's not realistic. That is not what 99.9% of people look like. Even the people that they're showing don't look like this, right? Like, if we're talking about photo editing. But the pushback should not be, I don't need to try it all, I just need to accept myself. No, you do need to accept yourself, but you need to also be willing to work at things, especially things that are within your control.
Right.
If I were to look at, I don't know, somebody like a royal person who was born into like billions of dollars, like, sure, I could, I guess, be upset about it, right? Like, oh, I wish that was my life. Like, I wish I could be a queen or whatever the fuck they're called. Like, whatever these people, clearly, I don't know, I've looked into it, but, right? Like, I could be upset that that's not my life. It's clearly not realistic. It's never going to happen. I can't be born again into this family. But if I look at somebody and I'm like, wow, like they have a great physique, or, you know, I need to be healthier for myself, not just looking at somebody else, it's okay to like want to work on that. Like it's okay to accept your body, but also want to change it. And it's not just about your body. Like I'm just talking about that because that's of course like what I primarily deal with. And I primarily deal with women who are comparing themselves to either what their bodies used to look like or used to feel like or used to perform, and then or other people. But this happens not just with that, it happens with looks, it happens with success. Like
when I hear you saying that, in my mind, what I'm hearing you say is they're rejecting their current self in favor of something else. You know, whether they want to look at themselves in the past or look at the person that they're going to be or could be or will be, they're rejecting who they are. And so they're not accepting that part of themselves. And that's really at the cause of it, or the root cause of, they're basically saying, I'm not enough. And I need abs in order to feel complete. I need whatever body part, or I need to be able to lift a certain amount, or I need to be able to place at this competition in order to feel value. And so we start placing the idea of who we are and our value as a person in inadequacy. Things that are temporary, that can't sustain, won't sustain, and literally mean nothing to anybody else outside of that world. Like, I got news for you. You could, you know, Gordon Ryan could walk in this room, who's like an ADCC multiple-time world jiu-jitsu champion, and I'll geek out and freak out because he's somebody that I know, but like the guy sitting in the other office doesn't know who he is. He doesn't care. I can be like, dude, he's the 3-time ADCC champion. He'd be like, that's nice. Like, it means nothing to him. So all that guy's accomplishments literally mean nothing to this other person.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. However many of your competitors, and I'm trying not to downplay the competition that somebody's going for, but it means something to the people in that circle. Whatever pro client can walk in the door and you'd be like, oh, Rick, this person just placed first at this particular pro competition. And I'd be like, cool. Like, where are we going to eat after this? Like, that's what I want to know. Like, it doesn't matter to me. It only matters to you. And so, but my point is, what I hear people doing in that process, what I think is you're rejecting yourself. You're not accepting who you are. And you're trying to accept the idea that you were once better and not who you are right now. And that's the dangerous message you're sending yourself, that you're not good enough. And so you're going to chase these ridiculous goals, and when you get them, we're still going to have to deal with the inadequacies that were set in place 2 months ago, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever.
So how do you balance that fine line then of, you know, so say for example, you know, a competition or, you know, a financial goal or whatever it might be, right? Like, we have to have something to strive for, right? And if you are, say you did decide, I'm going to buy a house this year, right? You have to save money, you have to prioritize things. If you said, hey, I'm going to do this competition and it's going to, like, training's really going to be really hard, and, you know, the diet and everything's going to be really intense, you know, you need to have something. It doesn't not matter at all, right? Because then you're not going to get through it. Like, it has to mean something to you, but at the same time, it can't mean everything to you. And it's really hard for me to try and communicate that with people, but I think that is it. Like, when you are, and a lot of people listening have done, you know, competitions or competing in some athletic event. Like, you don't go into an athletic event going, I hope I lose this. No, like, you're obviously going to hopefully win, or at least get, you know, whatever it might be, like qualify for something or get a certain number total, whatever it is, right? Like, you're going towards a certain goal. And every day that you wake up and you really don't feel like doing it, you remind yourself of that goal and it pushes you and you continue to hit it. But so that's okay, right? Like, that is necessary.
Sure.
But then
fine.
you also have to, I guess, just be realistic about it's not your everything. And I don't, like, maybe I'm not saying this right, but
no, I think you're doing a great job of talking about it, because what we're essentially saying is, if taking first place is the only way that I feel a sense of value, then I've lost what the purpose of the competition was. If the idea is that this competition is a way for me to challenge myself, a way for me to grow, a way for me to push myself into an uncomfortable space and really better myself and better my life, like, yeah, hell yeah, I'm a competitor first and foremost, above everything. Like, put me at a ping pong table against my mom and I am going to crush her. Like, there's no two ways about it. Why? Not because I don't love my mom, because I just want to win. And so there's a part of me that always wants to be a competitor and will have that mindset with it. But the idea of it isn't to be defined solely in terms of value by the accomplishment of winning or losing. The idea of it is what is this bringing into my life? Like, am I pushing myself Am I putting myself in that uncomfortable space? Am I like really being fucking brave and courageous in this endeavor? That's what means something. Because when the trophy is hung up on the wall, that plastic, metal, whatever it is, that doesn't mean anything. What matters is what that process was for you and how you got there. And that's the part that's gonna grow. So you wanna set a financial goal for yourself to pay off your house? Do it. That's okay. You wanna set a goal to compete in 2 years? Set that goal to compete. You want to set a goal of being like, hey, I want to try and be the best. Then try and be the best, but have an understanding of what the meaning is in that process for you. And that it's not just the end result that is defining you as a person or providing your sense of worth or value. Because if that's the case, it's not going to be there. And when you walk off that stage and you go home and all the spray tan comes off, you're going to be left with that inadequate person who's stuck inside you, where all you can focus on is the next competition because the temporary high wore off. Whether that's a text message that comes through, whether that's a string of reactivity from a post that you made, or you took first place in that competition. That's a temporary high. That's the dopamine rush. What's going to sustain, what will exist after that? That's up to you to decide. And what were your motives for getting into this competition and starting down this path to begin with? So I hope people are being more honest with themselves, but they're still defining themselves through victories. And if you really want to learn, find the people who can beat your ass. Find the people who will dominate you, right? Because that's when you're going to learn the most.
Yeah.
It's easy to beat people you're better than. So compete against the people you can't beat, and then see where you're at. See if this is really what you're in the process of trying to discover.
Yeah. So I think that there's so much nuance here, because it's like, compare yourself, but don't, and then do this, and then right. Like it's not super direct, and as always, like the most fringe extremes are where we really want to stay away from. So I think the biggest thing that's important to take away from this is that, comparison is normal. Like it's not something that you're ever going to just completely get away from, nor should you, but, really figuring out, okay, why are you comparing either yourself to, past you or, other people? And if you want to make changes, like why are you making those changes? Are you doing it because you're avoiding something else? Are you avoiding changes because now you're just trying to not address something? Or are you really doing this because you want to get better and you want to move forward in some aspect? It's this really it really is like this like delicate balancing act, I feel like, because you can either get like too complacent or you get too, I don't even want to say competitive. It's more just like this, it's like just really negative space where you're like always just like go like next, you're on to the next thing, like literally within a day. And I've done that with so many things where I'm like, this is the biggest goal that I'm setting, like I'm gonna fucking go for it. And I'm a very goal driven person, so that's easy. And then you get there and then you're like, oh okay, next thing, what's the next thing? And then it's like, well, should I have been happy about that? Like should I have like savor that maybe like for like, I don't know, a day at least, instead of just like writing it off like, well, I guess that wasn't good enough, like I need to go to the next thing, like, right? Like, but
and
then
the next thing is never enough either.
Yeah. So but also you can't be like, well, I'm never going to get there, so I'm not going to try anything at all, right? Like, so it's like this really weird, it really is just like this delicate balancing act. And, one of the biggest things that I'll tie it back to the last episode, if a lot of this comparison is being fueled by social media or any kind of media in general, really reevaluate kind of where you're at with it, because I think that's generally always pretty harmful. Like I've never compared myself to somebody else in that way, when I really don't know them, I really know nothing about their life and I'm just getting this like surface level view, whether it's a documentary or a fucking Instagram post or a video, whatever it might be. You see this snapshot, you see the best of them. And if you don't really know that person, you don't really know what's going on, those are the types of comparisons that I think you would agree are probably the most harmful. And really there's almost no benefit to that.
Right.
You can see, okay, I appreciate that person's accomplishments, like that might be something that I want to work towards, but you need to want to work towards it for yourself and not because you saw them do it necessarily.
Yeah. No, I agree with that completely. In a nutshell, that's exactly what happens when people are looking at, Instagram, Facebook, the social media stuff has become the modern version of what the magazines used to be, right? So in the past, you had to walk in and you saw Cosmopolitan or Maxim or whatever it was, and it had the model on the front who's been airbrushed and everything looks perfect. And that's just not the reality of the world that they live in. But Instagram now provides every person with a cell phone the platform to do those things. And so they're filtering their pictures, they're changing the lighting, and they're taking 20 pictures for every one that they post. And so they're only showing you the best parts. And so essentially what they're creating is this house of cards. They're creating an image and a lifestyle that they themselves don't even have. But they want you to believe that they have so that you buy into it, so that you look at it. And I've seen pictures where, the other day I actually found like this thing where they call them like try-ons and hauls or whatever, where like somebody will try on different like clothing items. Well, this one person.
There's this thing. Oh my
God. So
anyway, I know what those are. I don't watch those.
What the person did was she was trying on a piece of clothing, but then she was showing her wearing it now versus what it looked like when she took the professional photos, and they were drastically different. And the professional photos had been airbrushed and doctored and altered and edited, and so she looked phenomenal in those, but she looked pretty average in what she was wearing right now, and that's the part that no one ever sees. And unfortunately, Instagram and social media has just provided a billion more opportunities for you to feel that way and for you to compare yourself to other people, and it's not reality. Everybody behind those things has some version of problems in their life that they're just not talking about, whether it's financial or health or relational or occupational, whatever it is that is existing in their life, you just don't know it.
And they shouldn't, right? Going back to like every post somebody makes is vulnerable. Like I really don't think that anybody should have to post those things, right? So like realistically, everybody is going to have things that they're dealing with. Obviously, at some points in their life, they're going to have more things. Other times, they're going to have less things. But you should never, you should always look at somebody and go, no matter how perfect everything looks, we know that there's something else going on. You know what I mean? Because, nobody owes you to why, unless you're putting up this, vulnerable post every day, which that's, right. Right?
Which then we would
Which then we're okay, another issue. But in general, you should, even if you're super close with somebody, you know what I mean? You might not know everything that's going on. The only person who knows what's going on is that person.
Yes.
And that's really how it should be, So, I think if people have that realistic expectation of that too, no, nobody's just telling you what they're going through, because that would be honestly kind of weird, right? That would be hey, we need to set some boundaries. This person doesn't have any boundaries. So, looking at it through that lens too, I think can be useful. Yes, this person has their own things that they're dealing with, understandably so, and they're probably not sharing with us, understandably so. So just take that for what it's worth. Appreciate, oh, that's a cute skirt on the try-on haul that you were watching, or whatever it might be. And just go with that.
Yeah.
And don't look at it so much deeper. So is that kind of all for that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just try and remind people that the idea of comparison is basically what you're really doing is you're denying the inadequacies that exist within you. And what you're doing by comparing yourself to other people is you're basically saying, I'm not good enough. And in comparing yourself to other people, you're setting goals and expectations that you can't and won't ever hit, which will only continue to perpetuate the idea that you aren't good enough. And until you're willing to address that part of it, until you're willing to address the emotional pain that comes with that, you're going to get stuck in that cycle, whether it's Instagram or any other aspect of your life, looking at people around you who have different things, or a lifestyle that you think they have. Now you're just doing it to chase something rather than to create a better quality of life within yourself. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, so we really hope this was helpful. Like I said, this is something that I deal with on a daily basis with clients, and it's one of the most important messages that I can try and get across to them. So if you guys are interested in doing mental health consulting with Rick, you can check out the information in the show notes. Email is there. For all other information about our team, you can go to teamlocofit.com, and we will catch you guys next week.